Sir Francis Chichester, 1901 to 1972. Pioneer Airman. Chichester emigrated to New Zealand in 1919, then 18 years old. He returned to the UK to get his pilot's license and purchase a de Havilland Gypsy Moth. He could think of no better way of returning to New Zealand than to fly there in his own aircraft. At the time, only one man, Australian Bert Hinkler, had conquered the UK to Australia route alone. Many had lost their lives trying, gambling with the overwhelming odds of distance, weather, and the unreliability of the aircraft of that era. Historic former Brooklands Motor Racing Circuit and Airfield, south of London Heathrow Airport, UK. Freeware scenery. First banked motor racing circuit in the UK. One of the UK's first airfields. UK's largest aircraft manufacturing centre at one time. Now a heritage area and home to several organisations including Brooklands Motor and Aviation Museum and Mercedes-Benz World. Chichester's aircraft was a tiny biplane of only 9-metre wingspan, powered by an 80-horsepower engine and with a cruising speed of 128 km per hour. It was not built for flying across the world. Rather, it was built as a trainer, ideal for fledgling pilots to practice their circuits and bumps, as landings were affectionately called in those days. It was a forerunner of the famous Tiger Moth trainer. Late on the 19th of December, 1929, Chichester departed Brooklands for a short flight to London Croydon Airport. Before dawn on the 20th of December, he departed Croydon, bound for Australia and New Zealand. Chichester's heavily laden aircraft barely staggered into the air at the end of the airstrip. He later discovered that the frozen ground had ripped open one of his tyres. Once airborne, he headed for the English Channel, keeping his aircraft level by watching the moonlit ground below. He had neither blind flying instruments nor lights aboard. LFLY. Lyon-Bron Airport, Eastern France. Default scenery only. Original commercial airstrip for Lyon. Now just for GA. Over the channel, cloud obscured the moon. Just when he feared he was lost, Chichester luckily picked up the French coast. He landed at Lyon, 7.5 hours after leaving London. In an hour his tyre was repaired and the aircraft refueled. Warmed by an omelette, washed down by red wine, he took off on the next leg to Italy. Over the Alps, at 10,000 feet, all was fine, but beyond them, approaching Genoa on the coast, Chichester encountered severe turbulence and was fearful that the aircraft's wings would fold up. At times, air currents hurled his plane about so violently that petrol forced from the tank overflow sprayed over his face. Often the Moth was forced down to within a few feet of the hills. LIRP Pisa Airport, Tuscany, Italy. Default scenery only. Original airstrip for Pisa. Now an international airport. With nightfall, the air became calm and Chichester landed at Pisa in complete darkness. The waiting Italian army had neglected to turn the airfield lights on. It took him 2 goes to land. Then he got stuck in the mud, but help came from everywhere to pull him out. Chichester grabbed a couple of hours sleep, then took off for Sicily at 1:45 a.m. Before daybreak, the harrowing effects of his lack of sleep became agonizing. Time after time he dozed off. He tried waving his arms, stamping his feet, bouncing up and down in his seat, but all to no avail. Eventually, by removing his helmet and holding his face in the slipstream, Chichester was able to beat the overpowering desire to sleep until daybreak. Then, with the sun in his eyes, sleepiness abated, though he was afflicted with temporary double vision. HLLM Midigo Airport, Tripoli, Libya. Default scenery only. Original airstrip for Tripoli. Now an international airport. After snatching 15 minutes sleep on the ground in Sicily, Chichester crossed the Mediterranean and arrived over Africa at sunset. At his destination, Homs, he was again hindered by officials neglecting to light the airfield, so he was forced to carry on to Tripoli. At Tripoli, landing in darkness, the aircraft bobbed in a wet salt pan and nosed over. There was only a little damage, except for his precious propeller, which was broken. He had been airborne for 26 of the 40 hours since leaving the UK. During the 14 hours spent on the ground, he had only 3 hours sleep. It was 3 weeks before Chichester's aircraft was repaired, mainly waiting for spares from the UK. During his enforced stopover, 4 other record-attempting aircraft crashed in North Africa, killing all but one of the pilots. In Tripoli, his aircraft repaired, Chichester tested it before setting off. He tried some aerobatics which were so bad, he ended up in spins or barely controllable dives. The whole Italian aerodrome staff turned out to watch. After 30 minutes of very bad flying, he landed to their tumultuous applause as they thought him a great aerobatic pilot. Just after dawn, on the 9th of January, 1930, he set off again for distant Australia and New Zealand. HE-35 Abu Suwair Air Base, Cairo, Egypt. Default scenery only. An original airstrip for Cairo. Now a military air base. After an overnight stop at Benghazi, Libya, Chichester battled through a desert sandstorm. Once clear, he crossed the Nile Delta at 4,000 feet. Landing near Cairo at 3:50 p.m., he flew past a column of black smoke rising from the airport. Earlier, 2 aircraft collided in midair, killing 4 pilots. Chichester spent a pleasant evening with his cousin and departed Cairo just after sunrise the next morning. The sound of his engine had changed a little, and his cousin wanted to check it at Cairo, but Chichester wanted to press on. OIU, Ratbar, Iraq. Default scenery only. Very remote airstrip. After a short refueling stop at Gaza, Chichester enjoyed the flight over the Holy Land and the Dead Sea. Then he had trouble navigating in the wilderness towards the lonely desert fort, Ratbar, finally finding it at 3:30 p.m. He realized the need to service his aircraft. At Ratbar, there was a mechanic who helped him. They completed the overhaul after midnight. He departed Ratbar at 7:30 a.m. next morning. OIBB, Bushehr Airport, Iran. Freeware scenery. Original airstrip for Bushehr. Now a joint civil and military airport. After a short refueling stop at Baghdad and an enjoyable flight across the desert, Chichester landed at Bushehr at 5:10 p.m. He departed at 6:15 a.m. the next morning. While at Bushehr, he saw a DH-9 lying on its back, dripping petrol. It turned out that a military pilot clipped the top of a radio mast and crashed about an hour earlier. The aircraft was wrecked, but the pilot was okay. VECC, Netaji Subhas Chandra Bose Airport, Kolkata, India. Freeware scenery. Original airport for Kolkata, former Calcutta. Now an international airport. After brief stops at Nasirabad and Allahabad, and overnight in Jhansi, all in India, Chichester arrived at Kolkata at 2:45 p.m. with a rough-running engine. A mechanic was found, and he worked on the engine for the rest of the day and into the evening. After a good dinner and sleep, he departed next day at 6:30 a.m. Chichester was very appreciative of the mechanic's work because he was very tired, and after most arrivals, or before most takeoffs, Chichester himself would inspect the engine, change the 8 spark plugs, remove and clean the petrol filler, drain and replace the oil, check, and where necessary, adjust the tappets, grease all moving parts, and fill up the tanks with petrol. All of this on top of trying to look after himself, talking with others, and planning ahead. WIHH, Halim Perdana Kusuma Airport, Jakarta, Indonesia. Freeware scenery. Original airstrip for Jakarta, former Batavia. Now a joint civil and military airport. En route to Indonesia, after stops at Yangon, former Rangoon, in Myanmar, and at Singapore, both racecourse airstrips, Chichester faced towering storm clouds and heavy rain. He struggled to maintain control of the moth. Suddenly he saw waves dead ahead. He was descending rapidly. He managed to flatten out above a bay. Seconds later he emerged from the wall of rain to see Jakarta, his destination, ahead. Jakarta was the largest, most modern airport Chichester had seen since leaving the UK. He spent a day and 2 nights there, making social and business calls and attending to his aircraft. He departed at 6:40 a.m. on the second morning. WATA, Ayabu Talo, Haluan Airport, Adambua, Timor Island, Indonesia. Default scenery only. Original airstrip for Adambua. Landings on waterlogged Indonesian airstrips, Surabaya and Bima, often enlisting the help of natives to push his aircraft out of the mud, finally brought Chichester to Adambua, on the island of Timor, at 1 p.m. He departed at 7:30 a.m. the next morning, for the dreaded crossing of the Timor Sea, to Australia. Needless to say, he made a more complete inspection of his aircraft and his inflatable rubber boat than usual. To minimize time over water, Chichester left the island of Timor aiming for Rocky Point on Australian Bathurst Island. It was an easy run into Darwin from Bathurst Island. Chichester arrived over Darwin at 1:20 p.m. and flew over the town to alert the residents before landing at the airport. In fact, the long over water leg to Darwin that brought disaster to so many pilots was his easiest of the whole trip. Former Parrot Airstrip, Darwin, Northern Territory, Australia. The former original airstrip was just before the Darwin Turf Club directly ahead. The original runway is now Ross Smith Drive, which we are flying along. On arriving at the airport, Chichester thankfully switched off the motor. Formalities over, he adjourned to the nearest pub. Chichester had become only the second person, after Australian Bert Hinkler, to fly solo from the UK to Australia. After an annoying amount of paperwork from the health officer that night, and a restless sleep, Chichester departed Darwin at 6:45 a.m. next morning. Leaving Darwin, Chichester headed south across the barren inland for Camus Wheel. This leg was a navigator's nightmare. His official map marked all settlements in a grand manner, but where he expected a town of maybe 5,000 people, there would be a house and a couple of sheds. The map showed many rivers, but in 9 hours flying, he saw none. With his arrival at Camus Wheel overdue, and utterly confused, he put down alongside a deserted water bore. The combination of heat, lack of sleep and worry, finally overcame his normal calm, and he was panic-stricken. Shaking uncontrollably, he had great difficulty in setting up camp, and carrying even a small container of water. Eventually he dropped with exhaustion and passed a fitful night's sleep. At daybreak, with little fuel, Chichester headed southeast, looking for Canoe Wheel. After 15 minutes, he landed at a cattle station, just 5 kilometers north of Canoe Wheel. YCMW. Canoe Wheel, Queensland, Australia. Freeware scenery. Later that day, from the cattle station, Chichester made the very short flight to the Canoe Wheel Township airstrip. He was away again at 6:30 a.m. into rain and a flooded countryside. At least the rain was not as bad as the previous monsoons, which had scared him so much. YLRE, Longreach, Queensland, Australia. Freeware scenery. Original airstrip for Longreach. Historic Qantas airfield now includes a Qantas museum. Chichester spent a pleasant evening with the man who made the early DH-50 aircraft for Qantas. He was away at 7:48 a.m. the next day. YBCV Charleville, Queensland, Australia. Freeware scenery. Chichester landed at remote Charleville to an unexpected, overwhelming, formal reception and luncheon. He was away again at 3 p.m. that same day. YNRN, Narromine, New South Wales, Australia. Freeware scenery. After an overnight stop at remote, outback, Burke, from where he departed in a sandstorm, Chichester had an easy run to Narromine. A quick cup of tea with the Narromine Aero Club saw Chichester immediately off again. YSSY, Sydney Kingsford Smith Airport, Mascot, New South Wales, Australia. Freeware scenery. Original airstrip for Sydney. Now an international airport. Past the CBD in the next bay. Thousands of people at Sydney's Mascot Airport gave Chichester a rousing welcome when, on the 31st of January 1930, he arrived, accompanied by 10 aircraft of the New South Wales Aero Club he had teamed up with at 4,000 feet above the Sydney Harbour Bridge. The crowd was a complete surprise to him, and he made one of his worst ever landings. Chichester was celebrated for days in Sydney, all the while suffering from exhaustion, dysentery, and fear of crowds and strangers. Every night, his old regular nightmare occurred, where he lost his vision while flying, and then waited in darkness for the inevitable crash. New Zealand to Australia. East to west. In 1931, back home in New Zealand, Chichester decided to fly solo round the world, requiring first a flight across the sea to Australia. He converted his Moth into a float plane. Fuel limitations meant a route via Norfolk and Lord Howe Islands. Aerial navigation was in its infancy, so he pioneered the aviation use of a nautical sextant to find the islands. He became the first pilot to cross that sea from east to west, and in World War II his navigation technique was used by RAF Coastal Command. After crossing the sea from New Zealand to Sydney, Australia, Chichester planned to return to the UK by way of Japan, the Aleutian Islands, and Canada. But his pioneering aviation was to come to an end in Japan. He was badly hurt after colliding with telegraph wires stretching between two hills high above a harbour. Though he never completed his flight, he had set a new world's long-distance record for a solo seaplane and was the first pilot to fly solo from Australia to Japan. In 1936, Chichester was to make his last long-distance flight when he took a single-engined de Havilland Puss Moth from Sydney to London via Peking, inland China, Vietnam, India, and the Middle East. This flight, though done at a more leisurely pace, was still another great navigational achievement. Following the outbreak of World War II in 1939, the RAF rejected Chichester for pilot training, but appointed him senior navigation officer in charge of training at the RAF Central Flying School in the United Kingdom. After the war, Chichester was keen to get back into the record-breaking business, but the day of pioneering amateur pilots in light aircraft was gone. Speed had replaced distance, and aircraft going for these records were too expensive for the amateur to afford. First solo yacht around the world. Chichester's irrepressible urge to challenge overwhelming odds alone was later channeled into long-distance sailing. He was knighted by the Queen for being the first to sail solo around the world in 1996-7. This is what he is most remembered for. But the fact that his yacht was called Gypsy Moth 4 reminds us that aviation remained his first love. Thanks for watching. Hope you enjoyed.